Australia could see a housing shortfall of 175,000 homes in the next 5 years.
An extra 2.2 million people will call southeast Queensland home by 2046, swelling the population to 6 million. The massive jump will add extra pressure to the state's crippling housing crisis.
Prime Minister, the median house price in Sydney is an eye-watering $1.4 million. In Brisbane and Adelaide, where you used to be able to move for a cheaper house, it's close to $1 million.
Right, so here's a question that'll blow your mind. What if I told you that Australia once had a housing system so good that you could buy a house with a £5 deposit? What if I told you that in the 1950s, the government built houses for people, not for profit, and then helped you buy them with direct, affordable loans? You'd probably think I was having a laugh, right? Because in 2025, you need to earn $238,000 a year just to buy a house in Sydney. Even in bloody Darwin, you need $100,000 just to get a foot in the door. But here's the thing, mate. It's all true. Australia once had a housing system that actually worked for ordinary people, and it worked so well that home ownership rates shot up from 50% to 70% in just 1 decade. So what the hell happened to it?
Now, when I bought my first home, you didn't need a 20% deposit.
Let's go back to the 1950s, when Australia had just come out of World War II, and the government actually gave a about making sure ordinary people could afford a roof over their heads. Back then, we had something called the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement. Sounds boring as shit, right? But this little agreement was revolutionary. Under this system, the government didn't just talk about fixing the housing crisis. They actually did something about it. Here's how it worked. The government built houses, not for profit, not to make property developers rich, but to house people. These weren't luxury mansions. They were decent, affordable homes that ordinary Australian families could actually buy. And here's the kicker. You could buy one of these government-built houses with a £5 deposit. That's right, £5. In today's money, that's like walking into a real estate office with $1,000 and walking out with the keys to your own home. Compare that to today, where the average punter needs to scrape together over $100,000 just for a deposit, and you start to see just how badly we've been screwed over. But it gets better. Once you'd put down your £5 deposit, you didn't have to go cap in hand to some profit-hungry bank that would charge you through the nose for the privilege of borrowing money. No, the government would give you a direct loan at affordable rates. By the mid-1960s, 1/3 of all housing loans in Australia were provided by direct government lending. 1/3. Through war service loans for veterans and state-based schemes for everyone else, the government was actually helping people get into homes instead of leaving them to the mercy of corporate middlemen.
I got lucky with only needed a 10% deposit, and even then it scraped the edge of the barrel for my savings.
Now, you might be wondering how the government could afford to do all this. Well, here's another thing they don't want you to remember. Back then, the Commonwealth Bank was actually owned by the Commonwealth. It was our bank, working for us, not some foreign shareholders. The Commonwealth Bank wasn't trying to squeeze every last dollar out of Australian families. It was a public institution designed to serve the public good. Under this system, there was effectively no deposit gap. That crushing barrier that keeps young Australians locked out of home ownership today. The bank's job wasn't to make obscene profits for shareholders. Its job was to help Australians get into homes. And you know what? It bloody well worked. Home ownership rates increased from just above 50% at the start of the 1950s to above 70% by the end of the decade. That's a 20% increase in home ownership in just 10 years. When was the last time you heard a politician promise anything like that?
17% are picking a different candidate. The major parties, though, still locked at 50 apiece on two-party preferred.
Let's talk numbers, because the contrast between then and now is absolutely staggering. In the 1950s, the median house price was around $7,000 to $8,000. Now, before you start thinking, well, money was worth more back then, let me hit you with the real comparison, the house price to income ratio. Back then, houses cost 3 to 4 times the average annual income. Today, we're looking at 9 to 13 times annual income depending on where you live. In Sydney, it's nearly 10 times annual income. That means a house that would have cost you 4 years' salary in the 50s now costs you a decade of your life. But here's where it gets really depressing. The average Australian salary today is about $98,000. The median is even lower at around $72,000. But to comfortably rent, not buy, rent, an average unit in Australia, you need to earn $130,000 a year. Think about that for a second. Most Australians can't even afford to rent, let alone buy. People earning $70,000, which is close to the median wage, are spending 52% of their income just on rent. That's not sustainable, that's not fair, and that's not the Australia our grandparents built. So what happened? How did we go from a system that worked for everyone to a system that only works for banks and property investors? The answer is simple: corporate greed and political cowardice. In the 1990s, the government decided to privatise the Commonwealth Bank, not because it wasn't working. It was working perfectly, not because the public wanted it. Most Australians opposed the privatisation, but because the corporate elite wanted to get their hands on a profitable public asset. The privatisation happened in 3 stages between 1991 and 1996. By the time it was done, our public bank, the bank that had helped millions of Australians into their own homes, was sold off to private shareholders. And here's the real kicker. Today, the Commonwealth Bank is over 80% foreign-owned. That's right, the bank that was once owned by all Australians and worked for all Australians is now owned by foreign investors who couldn't give a damn about Australian families.
Yeah, this is the same governments that tell us they're going to fix the housing crisis. They've got no interest in fixing the housing crisis.
Let's talk about what happened once the banks became profit-driven corporations instead of public services. Today, Australia's major banks are making over $200,000 in profit from every typical home loan. $200,000. Their combined pre-tax profits, $44.6 billion. That's billion with a B. All of that money is being extracted from Australian families who just want a roof over their heads. Think about it. If you didn't have these corporate middlemen standing between you and a home loan, how much cheaper would it be to buy a house? The government has money. It can lend money. It can take repayments. Why do we need a corporate middleman making $200,000 in profit from every loan? It's like having a corporate middleman standing between you and life-saving healthcare. You wouldn't accept that, would you? So why do we accept it for housing, which is just as essential for human health and well-being?
And we've got to be responsible. We would be inheriting a budget which is heaving with $1 trillion in debt and not enough to show for it.
Here's what really gets my goat. This system isn't just unfair, it's actually killing our economy. When ordinary Australians have to spend 50, 60, 70% of their income just on housing, they don't have money to spend on anything else. That money that should be circulating through the economy, supporting local businesses, creating jobs, improving living standards, it's all being siphoned off to wealthy property investors and foreign bank shareholders. The housing crisis isn't a crisis for everyone. It's fantastic for banks. It's great for property investors. It's wonderful for anyone who already owns property. But for everyone else, especially young Australians, it's a disaster. And here's the thing. This isn't some natural phenomenon like a drought or a flood. This system was designed this way. It was deliberately created to transfer wealth from ordinary working families to the already wealthy.
New polling suggests the housing crisis could cost Victorian Labor another term in government.
Now, you might be thinking, surely the politicians are working to fix this, right? Well, I hate to break it to you, but they're not. Both Labor and Liberal are too scared to touch the system that's making their wealthy donors rich. Labor's current plan? At their current rate of progress, it'll take 70 years to make housing affordable again. 70 bloody years. By the time they fix the problem, your great-grandchildren might be able to afford a house. And why is progress so slow? Because there's one thing both major parties absolutely will not touch. The system that hands billions of dollars in profit to banks and property investors. They'll talk about supply and demand. They'll make it sound like some natural phenomenon that we just have to accept. But they won't touch negative gearing, they won't touch the capital gains tax discount, and they sure as hell won't challenge the bank's right to extract massive profits from an essential service. But here's the thing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already know how to fix this problem because we've done it before. The solution is sitting right there in our own history, waiting for politicians brave enough to use it. What if the government started building houses again? Not luxury developments for wealthy investors, but decent, affordable homes for ordinary Australian families. What if the government provided direct loans again? Cutting out the corporate middlemen who are making $200,000 in profit from every loan. What if we treated housing like we treat healthcare, as an essential service that everyone should have access to, not a commodity to make rich people richer? The technology exists, the knowledge exists, the precedent exists. What's missing is the political will to stand up to the corporate interests that are getting rich off the current broken system. You know what's really embarrassing? Other countries look at Australia and wonder how we managed to screw up something so basic. Singapore doesn't have a housing crisis because their government actually builds houses for people. They treat housing as a public good, not a private profit centre. Meanwhile, Australia, once a world leader in housing affordability, is now among the most unaffordable housing markets on the planet. Sydney is projected to become the world's most expensive city for housing. That's not something to be proud of. That's a national disgrace. We used to be the country that other nations look to for solutions. Now we're the cautionary tale they use to warn their own citizens about what happens when you let corporate greed run wild. So here's the choice Australia faces. We can keep pretending that the current system is natural and inevitable, or we can admit that it's a deliberate policy choice that's failing most Australians. We can keep letting banks extract billions in profit from an essential service, or we can remember that we once had a public bank that worked for all Australians. We can keep waiting 70 years for politicians to tinker around the edges, or we can demand they bring back the policies that actually worked. The housing solution, Australia doesn't want you to remember, isn't some radical new idea. It's the system we used to have, the system that worked, the system that made Australia a country where ordinary people could afford to buy a home. But bringing it back would mean challenging some very powerful interests. It would mean admitting that privatisation was a mistake. It would mean putting people before profit. And that's exactly why they don't want you to remember it. The question is, are you going to let them get away with it? To see the latest Australian crisis, click this video here.